I rise today to speak on Bill C-62, which seeks to delay the expansion of medically assisted death to individuals whose sole condition is a mental illness until March 2027. Yesterday, in anticipation of these remarks, I sent out an email to about 10,000 constituents, and I heard back from 95 of them on the subject we are debating today, medically assistance in dying, or MAID. I heard from parents who have lost children and those who have suffered from depression and were able to overcome their illness with treatment. The majority of respondents agreed with the position I'm about to outline, but there were some who did not. Many of those who disagreed with my stance came from Mission Matsby Fraser's Canyon's very large and diverse Dutch community, who have a deep understanding of this issue given its history in and our connections to the Netherlands. I appreciated hearing those thoughtful comments. Among those who disagreed, the most common concerns raised were about access for those suffering from dementia and advance requests. Concerns were also raised about the challenges many Canadians face in accessing mental health supports and treatment, which can leave some feeling hopeless. In fact, it nearly brought me to tears hearing from some constituents who said, "How dare you try to take away the right for me to access MAID when I'm suffering from mental illness," because they didn't see a pathway out for the circumstances in their life. And that's a horrible position to be in. I am grateful to everyone who took the time to share their thoughts and concerns in a compassionate and respectful way. One thing, however, was unanimous, and that is that our healthcare system is failing to meet the needs of Canadians suffering from mental health challenges, and this must be addressed. Almost a year ago, I stood before my colleagues in this House and expressed my concerns about the Liberal government's decision to extend medically assisted death to individuals solely suffering from mental illness. I highlighted the stark contradiction in our efforts to promote mental health awareness and services while also offering death as an option to those struggling with mental health challenges. Mental health affects every family in our country, and it pains me to see the government contemplate providing death as an option to individuals at their lowest points. I shared the heartbreaking story of a member of my own community in Abbotsford who received medically assisted death without her daughters being informed, despite her documented mental health condition. Regrettably, such stories are becoming too common under our existing MAID regime. Retired Corporal Christine Gauthier, who represented Canada at the Paralympic Games, tested before the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying that she had tried for 5 years to get a wheelchair ramp installed in her home through Veterans Affairs Canada. Instead, she was offered MAID by a VAC caseworker. A week before her testimony, the Minister of Veterans Affairs confirmed that at least 4 other veterans had been offered MAID as well. Now, after 8 years of this Liberal government and the cost of living soaring, some Canadians are seeking MAID in fear of homelessness. Most recently, I had a member of my community from the Family Institute of BC raise deep concerns about the expansion of MAID, stating that even with the current restrictions, our most vulnerable populations are gaining access to MAID without adequate precautions, social services, expertise, professional supports, and wraparound social networks to consistently represent their interests and voices. Despite our repeated calls for the protection of the most vulnerable, I believe this government has failed to act responsibly on this point. Around this time last year, instead of cancelling the expansion of MAID for mental illness, they introduced last-minute legislation to impose a temporary 1-year pause. Now, a year later, I am here again to see that the government wants to add another temporary 3-year pause to mental illness expansion, delaying it until March 2027. This past fall, the Liberals had an opportunity to get rid of this expansion altogether. In February, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Abbotsford, tabled Bill C-314, which would have cancelled the expansion of MAID to those with mental illness as the sole condition. When the bill came up for a second reading vote in October, most Liberals, along with the Bloc Québécois, defeated it. They seemingly are only choosing to delay the expansion again after the significant backlash they have received from mental health experts, doctors, and advocates across Canada. It seems that the government wants to recklessly push aside this issue instead of listening to what Canadians and indeed our mental health professionals want. For many years, we have heard about the fast expansion of assisted suicide in Europe. Now, globally, Canada has infamously become a leader with its progressive euthanasia policy. The Netherlands was the first country in the world to legalize euthanasia, and it took the country over 14 years to reach 4% of the total population's death from assisted suicide. Other countries with similar policies like Switzerland and Belgium haven't even reached the 4% mark. Yet Canada's MAID regime has only been around for 6 years and has outpaced these countries with euthanasia accounting for 4% of total deaths in 2022. Just in the past year, Health Canada reported that 13,241 Canadians received assisted suicide. That's more than a 30% increase from 2021 deaths. Belgium allows euthanasia to children of any age, and most recently the Netherlands expanded their euthanasia policies to include terminally ill children. The Liberals have met with the largest pro-MAID lobbying group, Dying with Dignity, many times, who are advocating for assisted suicide to be expanded to mature minors. If the government continues to take us down this slippery slope, will they lead us to a path that expands euthanasia to all children? Youth in this country are already falling through the cracks, with suicide being the second leading cause of death for youth and young adults. How can youth struggling with mental illness even think of having a better future if they become eligible for MAID and it becomes normalized? The Liberals, in my opinion, are inadvertently creating a culture of death. Delaying the expansion of MAID for mental illness is not enough. This government must immediately and permanently halt the expansion of MAID to those with mental illness. The reports from the committee echo what Conservatives have been advocating for years, that expanded assisted suicide to those suffering from mental illness will lead to the premature death of individuals who could have recovered with proper support and treatment. This government is taking an ideological stance, and it isn't listening to the experts working in the field. Last year, the country's largest psychiatric teaching hospital, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, said that they are not ready for this expansion and emphasized the need for more mental health resources. Chief of the Psychiatry Department at Sunnybrook Health Sciences in Toronto, Dr. Sonu Gain, has said that it's irresponsible for us to provide someone who isn't dying before we ensure that they've had access and opportunity for standard and best care to try to help alleviate their suffering. We cannot overlook the inherent dignity and value of human life, especially when individuals are at their most vulnerable. It is our duty as lawmakers to prioritize the well-being and protection of everyone in Canada, particularly those facing mental health challenges. As a Member of Parliament for Mission Matsby Fraser Canyon, I believe in upholding the principles of compassion and support for those struggling with mental illness. Yes, I also acknowledge that we need to do a lot more, and efforts to date have not been sufficient, both from a government response and a societal response. Delaying the expansion of MAID for mental illness is not the solution. It merely postpones the inevitable reckoning and the profound ethical and moral implications of such legislation and the broader implications we're faced with here today. I believe that those struggling with their mental health deserve support and treatment, not death. We know that recovery is possible when treatments are more readily available. Thank you for your time today, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Honourable Member, in his speech he mentioned the 31% increase in number of Canadians taking the assistance of this MAID legislation. I know this number, when seen in isolation, 31% jump is big. However, does he agree with me that because the legislation is fairly new, so all the people who have been waiting with suffering for so long a time, they have started utilizing this MAID legislation provisions? Does he not agree that going future, when the legislations sort of get, when this MAID provisions get normalized, that huge rate of growth he quoted will not be so in the future.
The honourable member for Mission Maskey Fraser Canning.
Well, I'd like to thank the member from Nepean for a very fair question and some of the points he raised. Are we simply catching up in Canada as it relates to the availability of MAID? Perhaps in some cases, but under the current legislation, there has to be a foreseeable death. So I believe that with the way information is exchanged, the access to MAID and the access to information that people has led to a rapid increase, yes. But I will also note that there was an individual in my community of Abbotsford who accessed MAID because she didn't feel she had a place to live. That story was well documented in Canada. She didn't believe she had the support she needed to live a life that was respectable. So I believe that with the normalization of MAID, for people that don't feel they have a lot of hope in life, that it's become a more readily available option. And I guess my message today is that all people should have hope.